Thanks for joining me today on the Chattervast podcast. Today's episode is a continuation of Tuesday's episode, where I was discussing with my friend some of the reasonings behind his voting for Biden. So let's get to it.
Which brings me to another point that I know that people listening, if they're listening to this, they're in our circles, they're going to ask the question, how could you vote for somebody who is not pro-life? Mm-hmm. Which is that's a huge question. Yep. It has obviously lots of ties to lots of different things in there, lots of things to talk about, but like, what would you say to something like that? Because I know I've had people ask me this and they're like, oh, are you going to ask him that? I was like, well, yeah, I mean, if you're interested in knowing, I'm sure other people want to know. So,
yeah. And that's an excellent question. I think that is probably the one that I've been asked the most on this. Part of it comes back to something Al Mohler actually said in 2016, ironically enough. So he was on a panel with Russell Moore and some other guys from Southern Seminary, and he was asked a similar question. And he's much more articulate than I am and much more political savvy.
I mean, it's his job to be, right?
Right, exactly. So this is little Kurt in South Carolina just sharing his opinion, all right? But he said something to the effect of that abortion is an important issue, but it is not the only issue. And to be I think the term that he used is a single issue voter, for him was not a viable option. You need to look at the whole package, so to speak. And I think that that's a good observation, because we often, especially in our circles, get very focused on abortion, and it is an evil, right? I don't think that there's any question about that an elective abortion is something that God does not condone. And so when we look at that, we say, how can we either eliminate or at least reduce elective abortions? Is that going to come from the top down? No, it's not. So whoever is in the president, similar to what we were just talking about, has little effect on the abortion rate. So you can look back since 1980, abortion rates have consistently dropped regardless of which party is in power. Right now, they are at a lower rate than Roe v. Wade. And so I think that those in the pro-life movement need to ask a question, what is our goal? Is our goal to eliminate elective abortions? And I think that that's a fine goal. If that is your goal, then there is no completion to that task. Mm-hmm. As long as there are people on the planet prior to the return of Christ, you will be fighting that battle. And I think that that's an honorable and noble battle for people to take up. If your goal is to reduce the rate of elective abortions, then you'd need to have a conversation. How do we do that? And what would be an acceptable rate? And so you get into aspects of statistics and things. Obviously, same thing with car accidents. So we build child protection seats. What is the rate of injury that we're okay with? Obviously, nobody wants their child to be hurt, but you have to find that balance, right?
Yeah, you can't make planes perfectly safe so that you never have a plane crash,
right.
But because it's just not cost effective to fly then, so.
Right, and so how do you find the most effective balance to that? And in my experience, we don't have those conversations.
Yeah.
You're either pro-life or you're pro-death. And when you put it in those black and white terms, there is no middle ground. And what's interesting is that most of Americans don't want abortions. When we talk, though, with many of our friends who are part of the pro-life movement, the vilification of people on the quote-unquote other side is unhelpful.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's much better to have a conversation to understand, what is your position? How do you view this? And so to come at it from that aspect. So how could I vote for Joe Biden, who is not pro-life? Whatever that means, right? So we can get into terms and definitions. It comes down to that I don't think that his being in office is going to affect the abortion rate in a negative way. People will disagree with me on that, and I understand that. I think everyone has a right to their perspective, but the statistics would not agree with them. Statistically, the abortion rates have continued to decline regardless of who is in office. We'll always say it's the judges. We need to get conservative judges on the court. So our goal, we need to do whatever it takes to win, and the win is conservative judges. Well, historically, judges have not overturned law. They have been a stabilizing force for law. And so Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. Personally, I don't anticipate that ever changing. And so we can throw a lot of energy behind that to try to overturn it, but we've had administrations that have been Republican through and through, from the White House to the Congress, and they've been able to appoint conservative judges, and nothing has changed. And so if over the past 50 years nothing has changed and we've been doing the same thing over and over again, there's a definition for doing the same thing and not having any change, and that's insanity.
Yeah.
And so if the president doesn't affect abortion rates and judges don't overturn legislation for abortion, what does affect change? And it's at the local and state level. Yeah. And so, again, we come back to that. Instead of taking all this passion and energy on who do we vote for president, I think that it's important. It definitely is important who is in office. They set the national tone. There are national security issues that they address. There are fiscal questions that play a role. So there is it's hugely important. But when it comes to the issue of abortion, it's not as important as some people would like, as they make it out to be. Yeah. And so if we do want to affect positive change in the abortion, get involved at your local and state level. Have conversations with people. I mean, we're having a conversation about abortion right now, but it's in a political context. Yeah. How often have we talked with somebody in not a political context about abortion? How has this affected you? What are ways that we can help you? Things of that nature. So if, and I know this is a broad topic, probably be a whole nother discussion in itself, but if the pro-life movement, their goal and desire is to reduce abortion rates, I think it would be an interesting exercise to take Roe v. Wade off the table and say, if we know this law will never change, can we still reduce elective abortion rates?
Then you might actually be targeting the actual problem, humanity and sin.
Exactly. So we would go and talk with women who either have had abortions or are considering abortions and ask why.
Yeah.
Help me understand why you're taking this choice or took this choice. Proverbs talks about a person who answers a matter before he hears it, to him it's a folly and a shame. And so if we want to produce change, we need to take time to understand before being understood. Yeah. And so I think that is a big part. And we'll find that there are a lot of things that we can do on the state and local level to reduce abortion, regardless of what happens in the presidency or with Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point there, because so recently I've been commenting on other videos and watching different YouTube videos of various things. And I talked about socialism a lot in Escape News podcast on my channel a couple times. And so I was like, I should just go listen to what they talk about. And so I stumbled upon this Marxist socialist explanation video. It was very long. I admit, I didn't listen to everything, but I was like, I wonder if I could leave a comment, because I want to understand if you're coming from that mindset. I'm not that mindset. But I don't want to come into it, which I feel like is the hard thing as a human. You come in with the tropes, the stereotypes of what the other side is. There's always your straw man, there's your names that you have for them and what you think they believe. And so that was a long conversation thread I had with these Marxist people who actually invited me to be part of their group. Hey, you should join our Marxist group. And I was like, whoa, I'm not interested in that kind of revolution. I just want to learn if the things that I believe about you are true. And I think that's a first step in a conversation to do. I can't say I walked away from the conversation feeling anything different. I felt like most of the stuff that they said and that I said, it was okay, so some of the stereotypes are true regarding these things, but I think you need to actually have that conversation. And regarding abortion, especially, there's a lot that the church has, I think, lost we've lost to the other side, because you look at people who have kids out of wedlock or are considering abortion, and that's very shameful. And even some of the churches I've been in, those people are kind of outside of the church, and we're afraid of working with messy people in messy situations. It's hard. Like, I get that. Like, you don't want to do hard things all the time or have drama and difficult relationships. I get that. But like, if you're not having those people around, if you're not being a good influence, and if you're not talking to those people, and you're just coming in with saying, hey, we're making laws to make it, we're going to control you by telling you you can't do these things because of laws, that's not really addressing the humanity of a person. I mean, nobody likes that kind of parent who just makes the laws and doesn't actually care about the child in a loving way. And I think we could solicit more change, like you're saying, by even at our local level. If we're dealing with politics, like, that's great, but I think, like, you have to, if you know people like that, or you have to be welcoming, you can't disparage people like that. Like, you don't know their life. Obviously they know what they've done is wrong most often than not. Like, I rarely meet somebody who does something that is bad and says it's good. Like, that's very rare, I feel like, personally, in my circles. And you know it's wrong, but we don't have to just sit there and just target that the whole time, because you're just pushing them further away, and then you move back into that. Let's just make laws so that you have the right outcomes. I want everything to look good, right, which is a huge difference. Like, Trump coming in to make America great again was his platform, and I think that appealed to a lot of the base that voted for him, like older people who remember America that was more outwardly conformed and moral in some ways, and so they missed that, and that's what he was promising them. But that's just that outward conformity. That's not like the caring, the depth of the intimate relationships with people who are going through difficult things, who are doing wrong things, and you need to have that conversation there.
Right. And I want to go back to something that you touched on. I think it was really good when you got connected with that Marxist group and understanding where they're coming from. Something that we did in seminary is we had to write papers on a variety of theologies or different positions, and you had to represent people holding all of these different views. And the goal was always to write their position in such a way that if they read it, they would say, yeah, yep, that's what I believe. You've presented that accurately. And so even if I disagree with where you're coming from, I still need to have the integrity to say, this is his position, here's how he argues it, and now I'm going to critique that. Mm-hmm. And that was always the goal. And I think that as humans, we have a hard time doing that. It's easier to slap a label onto something and then take that label and apply it to this swath of people and then just vilify them for whatever it may be. We're from New England, and so we don't like people from New York.
Yeah,
right?
People don't get that. They're like, they calling me a Yankee, and I'm like, stop.
Exactly. I am not a Yankee. I am from Massachusetts. I am a Boston Red Sox. All right. And so we just take this label, Yankee, and we slap it on all these people from New York, and you're all bad. It works in that situation, right? No.
My wife still even gets confused sometimes, like, oh, what states are in New England and New York is like, it's like, well, I guess if you've never been up there, right, you don't really even know the distinctions that, like, even between all the states. You can't do that to.
So we do it in so many areas, and in some time, so sports, it doesn't make that whole much of a life difference. I know my Boston people will not like me for that, but when it comes to things that are life and death, it is even more important to understand where somebody is coming from. There's an English theologian, John Stott, who said there's no such thing as Islam. There's a particular person's Islam. There's no such thing as Buddhism. There's a particular person's Buddhism. And the point that he was trying to make there is not that there are not tenets of these religions. Obviously, they are. But if you meet somebody and they say, I'm Muslim, you can't automatically say, therefore, I know all of this stuff about you. You have a general conception of it. So what Stott was arguing for is get to know that person. How do they understand their faith? How do they work out their faith? And from that platform, you'll have a much better inroad to build a relationship and minister the gospel to them. It comes back to that whole principle: seek to understand before being understood. And I think the same thing with abortion. If somebody says, I'm in favor of abortion, you say, well, what do you mean by that? Why do you hold that position? Help me understand how you came to that. And I think that you'll find there are very few people that are in favor of what you thought they were in favor of for abortion. I remember even during the Democratic primary that I believe it was Amy Klobuchar said, we need to get away from this idea in the Democratic Party that abortion is something to be celebrated. It's not. We need to create ways so that women do not feel that it is their only option going forward.
Yeah.
And for me, as somebody who grew up in Republican circles, I was like, wait, hold up. Like, even though
She said something I agree with?
Right. It's like, so that should be a trigger or a flag for us. Wait, just because somebody's a Democrat doesn't mean that they're a baby killer, which is what we're often labeled as. And I'm not a Democrat, right? Yeah. But I think that taking that step to be vulnerable, to understand where somebody is coming from, and then move forward in the conversation is very, very helpful.
I think that's really important. I had mentioned this like in a short, I think a week or something ago. I had watched a video by AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which is like very difficult because like that is, if there isn't anybody who's like the epitome of the opposition to a fundamental Christianity circle right now, would be AOC, I guess, because besides Nancy Pelosi and stuff, like you have all these particular people that are like, they're the enemy. And so I was like, well, I mean, I don't actually know. Who was it? Barack Obama. I didn't actually hear his voice until he's like in his 7th year of his presidency. I was like, maybe I should actually go, listen to what this person says rather than just using them as like the butt of a joke or something like that. And so I went and listened to something, and it's like, okay, this person is very passionate, and that is very coming across very strongly. They're very passionate about what they feel. And I can't say that I actually disagreed with what she wants to accomplish. It was regarding energy and coal and climate change and stuff. And obviously climate change is like a whole nother discussion. But in the midst of that, I was like, okay, you can go listen to somebody that is your perceived enemy and go listen to their points. Strip out the name calling, because everybody does that. And like even she did that, like calling out the other side or something. I was like, we don't really need to be doing that. And so if you strip away that, find what the point she's saying or the other person's saying, and find out where you agree on some of those things. Because like I was like, okay, we agree on this stuff. Not that I can actually do anything personally. I don't feel like I'm going to change us into the nuclear energy revolution or anything like that. But like, we agree on these points. We have different reasonings for or how we think this can be solved. But if we find out where we agree, maybe we can find a resolution, a way to solve it together, rather than just, that's what America is like, very divided. Which obviously we know that like politically, and that's what this whole conversation is about, is the division here and trying to bring people to the table, bring people to a discussion rather than just, the other side and you're this stereotype. It's not healthy.
Shoot at each other from across this divide. And I think that as Christians, we of all people should be at the forefront of any type of reconciliation or reaching across, because we were enemies of the Creator. We wanted nothing to do with him. And then that Creator said, okay, I'm going to come walk in your shoes. I'm going to live in your world. I'm going to move around through all of your troubles and all of your difficulties. I'm going to take on all of your sin, all of your problems, and I'm going to rescue you. And so we have been given shown so much love, given so much hope and life. And so we of all people should say, yeah, the Creator did that for me, so I'm willing to walk with you through whatever you're going through. If your thing is anger over the racial tension, let me walk with you. Help me understand what you're facing. If your anger is over the economic situation and you feel that the country is turning socialist and it's all going to be destroyed, let me come walk with you. Help me understand what your struggles are and how can I be a friend to you. If your issue is abortion and lowering that abortion rate, help me understand what your passion is. Is there something that I can do to help? I think that in some senses, it should be a no-brainer for Christians.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody's misunderstood or stereotyped, it's Christianity, like across the board. That happens like internationally, everywhere. Like, it's like those people, religion pushers, Bible thumpers, whatever. And like, there are so many names for Christianity, and you'd think, being the people that are commonly troped and stereotyped everywhere, you'd think we'd be the ones who'd be like, hey, we want to be understood, so thus we should go understand people. But that's not always often the case that it actually happens. So, yeah. Well, I feel like it was a good conversation. I mean, there's a lot more to be had with a lot of like the tangents that we have there. But regarding your Facebook post, particularly, I think that was the majority. I'm sure anybody listening to this would be like, oh, well, I have all these questions about this particular point. And maybe we can come back to that someday if you're on YouTube, like leave a comment and bring up some of those things and we'll address them. But do you have any other things to say regarding like that Facebook post or anything regarding like any of this stuff, I guess?
I think a couple of the main things that I hope people take from this or from anything that I share. One is, if you disagree with me, I don't hate you. Right?
Neither do I.
Right. People are complex, and these are complex issues, and it's okay to disagree. The second thing is seek to understand before being understood. Take time to reach out to somebody that you disagree with and have a conversation with them and say, help me understand why you feel this way, and be vulnerable and open to receive what they're saying and try to see it from their perspective. And then finally, and this is just from my faith, have the right perspective, right? We've gone through 4 years of Trump, and Trump's going to be gone. Right? Jesus is forever. In 4 years, Biden's going to be gone, but Jesus is still going to be there. And as Christians, we need to make sure that our focus is right, so that regardless of who rises and falls, right? Eventually America is not going to be here, but Jesus is going to remain forever. And so is our life demonstrating the values that Jesus would hold as primary?
That's a really important point to make there. And so, well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And of course, comment, like, subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate it. I'd appreciate it. And then, of course, if you want Kurt and I to have any more discussions regarding, whatever, I'm sure he'd be happy to do. It's been really fun. We've been good friends. So, thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Chad.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for joining me on the Chattervast podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, so please share it with a friend if you did. And of course, if you're on YouTube, you can leave comments regarding some of the thoughts you may have had regarding what we talked about. And of course, keep it civil, and we can address some of those comments at a future date. And if you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon or subscribing to the channel or giving us a good review on podcast apps. We'd really appreciate it. Well, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next week on the Chattervast podcast.